Dear listeners, thank you for your incredible support in helping our channel grow. We're aiming for 1,000 subscribers, so please support us by subscribing and helping us reach this milestone. Now let's start the story. A farmer and a veteran crouched behind a tractor as armed men closed in around them. Just 24 hours earlier, the farmer had hired the mysterious drifter, ignoring the town's warnings. The next morning, as they got to work, a convoy of black SUVs arrived unannounced, forcing both men to confront a dangerous past and make choices that would alter their lives forever. Mark Larson stood at the edge of his cornfield, watching the sunrise cast a golden hue over his 80 acres. At 58, the deep lines on his face told the story of 3 decades spent working the same land his father had farmed before him. The drought had hit Oak County hard, but Mark's farm had been struggling more than most, not because of bad luck, but because of his own choices. Unlike other farmers who had embraced genetically modified crops and chemical fertilizers to boost their yields, Mark had stuck to the old ways: sustainable, natural, just as his father had taught him. "You're letting sentiment cloud your judgment," Howard James had warned him at yesterday's town meeting. Owner of the county's largest farm supply store, Howard had spent years urging Mark to modernize. "Your father would have adapted. Pride doesn't pay the mortgage." Maybe Howard was right. Another couple of seasons like this, and Mark might lose everything. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was his daughter, Emma, calling from her college dorm 3 hours away. "Dad, I got the financial aid letter. It's not enough. Not even close." Mark closed his eyes. Emma, the first in their family to attend college, was studying agricultural science. Her dream was to return home and help modernize the farm with sustainable methods, ways to improve yields without selling out to big agricultural corporations. "We'll figure something out, honey," Mark reassured her, though even he didn't believe his own words. "Just focus on your studies." After they hung up, Mark stood staring at the fields his grandfather had purchased after returning from World War II. 3 generations of Larsons had made this land work. He wasn't about to be the one to lose it. That's when he spotted the man walking down the rural road that bordered his property. Tall and lean, carrying a military-style backpack, he moved with a distinct gait, one that Mark immediately recognized. Raised in a military family, Mark knew a soldier's walk when he saw one. The man stopped at the entrance to Mark's farm, eyes scanning the help wanted sign Mark had put up 3 days earlier. No one in town had shown any interest. Young people were leaving Oak for city jobs, not looking for farm work. As Mark approached, he got a closer look at the stranger. Mid-30s, short brown hair, upright posture, but there was a weight on his shoulders, something unseen but heavy. His clothes were clean but worn, and his eyes told a story of a man who had witnessed things no one should have to see. "Morning," Mark called out. "You looking for work?" The man hesitated, assessing him before answering. "Yes, sir. The sign says you're hiring." "Farm experience?" Mark asked. "Some. Grew up on one in Nebraska before joining the Marines." That explained the posture. "I'm Mark Larson. Jacob Carter, but everyone calls me Cart." They shook hands. Cart's grip was strong, his eyes steady. "Marine Corps?" Mark guessed. 12 years. "Force Recon." There was no pride in Cart's voice, just a simple statement of fact. Mark knew enough about the military to recognize what that meant. Force Reconnaissance, elite special operations. This man had seen real combat. "What brings you to Oak?" "Not exactly a place people pass through," Mark asked. A slight pause. "Just looking for something quiet for a while." Mark nodded, not pushing. "The pay's not much. I can offer room and board in the farmhand cabin. It's small but clean." "That works for me, sir." "Drop the sir. I worked for a living too." A ghost of a smile crossed Cart's face. An old military joke: officers got called sir, enlisted men worked for a living. "Army?" Cart asked. "No, but my father was Korea. My brother Vietnam." Mark didn't mention his son, Jason. That wound was still too fresh, even after 8 years. "The job's yours if you want it," Mark said. "Can you start today?" "Yes, I can start now." Mark led Cart to the small cabin at the edge of the property. It had been empty since his last farmhand had left 2 years ago for better-paying work in the city. The space was simple: 1 room with a bed, a small kitchenette, and a bathroom. Dusty but intact. "I'll get you some clean sheets," Mark said. "There's a town meeting tonight. We can head into town, pick up some groceries." Cart set his backpack on the small table, just 1 bag for all his possessions. "Town meeting? Monthly thing. Mostly boring local politics, but it'll give you a chance to meet people." What Mark didn't say was that introducing Cart at the meeting would help head off the inevitable gossip. In a town as small as Oak, a new face never went unnoticed. By late afternoon, Mark was already impressed. Cart worked without complaint, fixing a section of fence that had been down for months, then helping with an irrigation pump that had been acting up. The man was methodical, efficient, and required little direction. "You're good with machines," Mark observed as Cart reassembled the pump motor. Had to be in the field. If your equipment fails, you can't call a mechanic. It was the first personal detail Cart had volunteered all day. That evening, when they arrived at the town hall, Mark noticed how Cart immediately surveyed the room, positioning himself near the wall with a clear view of every entrance. The meeting was routine budget discussions, road repairs, complaints about teenagers racing on back roads. Afterward, as people lingered over coffee and cookies, Mark introduced Cart to a few folks. Reactions were mixed. Some were polite but reserved. Others, like Bill Harmon, who owned the local diner, were more welcoming. "Any friend of Mark's is welcome at my place," Bill said, shaking Cart's hand. "First coffee's on the house tomorrow." But Mark didn't miss the whispers. The sideways glances said it all small towns had long memories, and Oaked had seen its fair share of drifters who brought nothing but trouble. Howard James was the most direct. "You hiring now, Mark?" he asked, loud enough for nearby conversations to pause. "Thought you could barely keep the farm running as it is." "The farm's doing fine, Howard," Mark replied evenly. "Just needed an extra pair of hands." Howard's eyes narrowed as he studied Cart. "Where do you say you were from, son?" "Nebraska, originally," Cart answered. "And what brings you all the way to Oaked?" "We're not exactly on the tourist maps." Mark was about to step in when Sheriff David Palmer joined them. David had been sheriff for nearly 20 years, with a knack for easing tensions before they escalated. "Evening, everyone." "Mark, good to see you." He turned to Cart. "David Palmer. I'm the sheriff around here." "Jacob Carter," Cart replied, shaking his hand. David held on to Cart's grip a moment longer than necessary. "Military? Marines?" David nodded. "Thought so. My brother was a Marine, served in Desert Storm." Something unspoken passed between them. Mark had the distinct feeling David was sizing up Cart, making his own silent assessment, and letting Cart know he was being assessed. "Stop by the station tomorrow," David said casually. "We should chat." "We could do that," Cart replied. As they were leaving, elderly Mrs. Winters, who had taught 3 generations of Oaked children before retiring, caught Mark's arm. "Be careful, Mark," she whispered. "That young man has seen things, done things." "I can tell. Haven't we all, Mrs. Winters?" Mark answered gently. She shook her head. "Not like him. There's a darkness there." Sheriff David appeared at Mark's side, having overheard. "Mark, got a minute?" They stepped outside, away from the crowd. "You remember that drifter back in '98? David asked quietly. Mark nodded. How could anyone forget? A stranger had passed through town, taken in by the Millers to work their orchard. 3 weeks later, their barn burned down, valuables went missing, and the drifter vanished the same night. "I'm not saying your guy is like that," David continued. "But folks around here have long memories. After what happened to the Millers, then that incident at the Carson farm a few years back." He let the words hang. "Cart's not like that," Mark said, more confidently than he felt. "He served our country. So did plenty of guys," David said, his tone softening. "And some came back different than when they left." He sighed. "Just be smart, Mark. Keep your eyes open." Back inside, Mark noticed several townspeople watching Cart warily. Howard James had gathered a small group, speaking in hushed tones, occasionally glancing in Cart's direction. When they saw Mark looking, they quickly dispersed. The drive back to the farm was quiet. Mark didn't push for conversation, and Cart seemed comfortable with the silence. But as they turned onto the gravel road leading home, Cart finally spoke. "They don't want me here." "Some don't," Mark acknowledged. "Others are just cautious. Small town. I can find work somewhere else." Mark shook his head. "If I worried about what everyone in town thought, I'd never get out of bed in the morning." He paused. "Unless you're planning to cause trouble. In which case, I should know now." "No, sir. No trouble," Cart said. "Just looking for quiet work." Mark nodded. "Then we'll be fine." But as he pulled up to the farmhouse, he couldn't shake the nagging thought, was he making a mistake? He knew nothing about this man beyond the fact that he was ex-military and carried himself like someone who had seen the darkest corners of the world. What Mark didn't realize was that within the next 24 hours, his decision to hire Jacob Carter would either be the worst mistake of his life or the one thing that saved everything he held dear. Dawn broke to the sound of hammering. Mark woke, momentarily disoriented, then remembered Cart must already be at work. He dressed quickly and stepped outside, finding Cart repairing the steps to the old grain silo. "Been up long?" Mark asked. "Couple hours," Cart replied without pausing. "Hope you don't mind, I saw this needed fixing." "Mind?" "No," Mark said, impressed. The steps had been a safety hazard for months. "Coffee's on in the house when you're ready for a break." Over breakfast, Mark laid out the day's tasks before mentioning, "I need to head into town for supplies. You should stop by the sheriff's office like he asked." Cart nodded. "Planning to." They drove separately, Mark in his truck, Cart in the battered Honda Civic he had parked down the road the day before. In town, they split up, agreeing to meet at Bill's diner afterward. Mark was loading bags of feed into his truck when Howard James approached without preamble. "You're making a mistake, Mark." Mark secured the last bag before turning. "Hello to you too, Howard. I'm serious. Nobody knows a thing about this guy. Where's he been? What's he done? Did you even check his references? He's a veteran looking for work. That's enough for me, is it?" Howard pressed. "Did you ask what kind of discharge he got? There are veterans, and then there are veterans, if you know what I mean." Mark felt his patience wearing thin. "What I know, Howard, is that my farm is my business. Your farm is one bad season away from foreclosure, and we both know it," Howard said, lowering his voice. He glanced around before continuing. "Taking in strays? Not a smart move, Mark." What Howard didn't say still hung heavy between them. Everyone knew the town had cut Mark some slack because of the Larson name. 3 generations of respect had bought him a little patience from creditors, including Howard's family, who had stakes in the local bank. "I'll keep that in mind," Mark said, climbing into his truck. As he pulled away, he glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Howard already on his phone. By noon, the whole town would be talking. At the diner, Cart was already seated in a booth, back to the wall, coffee in hand. His posture was tense. "Everything go okay with the sheriff?" Mark asked as he slid into the booth. "Fine." Mark waited, but Cart didn't elaborate. Bill came over with a fresh pot, refilling Cart's cup and pouring coffee for Mark. "How's our resident hero doing today?" Bill asked with a friendly grin. Cart shifted, looking uncomfortable. "Just a Marine, sir. Nothing heroic about it." Bill shook his head. "My son's in the Army, 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. I know what you boys go through over there. Heroic in my book." After Bill walked away, Mark studied Cart's expression. There was something there, pain, maybe regret, that flickered across Cart's face when Bill mentioned heroism. "You don't have to talk about it," Mark said. "But if you ever want to, I'm a good listener." Cart looked up from his coffee. "Why'd you hire me, Mr. Larson? Really? You don't know me." "The town sure has its reservations." Mark considered his answer. "Because 25 years ago, I needed a chance, and someone gave it to me. Sometimes, that's all it takes, one person willing to look past assumptions." The corner of Cart's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "And what assumptions should people be looking past with me?" "That's for you to say, not me." Their food arrived, ending the conversation. As they ate, Mark noticed a black SUV with tinted windows cruising slowly past the diner. "Government plates," he commented. "Unusual ride around here." Cart glanced up, and his entire demeanor changed in an instant. His shoulders tensed, eyes sharpened, and his hand instinctively moved toward his hip where a weapon might have been before. "We should go," he said, his voice suddenly flat. "Everything okay? Just remembered something I need to do back at the farm." Cart was already pulling cash from his wallet for the bill. As they stepped outside, Mark spotted a second black SUV parked across the street. 2 men in suits stood beside it, watching the diner. When they saw Cart, one of them murmured into his wrist, speaking into a communication device. They drove back separately, but Cart's Honda stayed locked onto Mark's bumper the entire way, as if he was being tailed. In his rearview mirror, Mark saw Cart constantly checking his own mirrors. Whatever was happening, it wasn't good. And now, it had followed Cart to Oaked. As they turned onto the long driveway leading to the farm, Mark's stomach tightened. 3 black SUVs were parked in front of his farmhouse. At least 6 men in dark suits were moving into position around the property with military precision. This wasn't local law enforcement. Cart's car suddenly accelerated, pulling alongside Mark's truck. He gestured frantically for Mark to stop. Both vehicles came to a halt about 100 yards from the house, hidden by a stand of trees. "Stay here," Cart ordered, his entire demeanor shifting once more. The quiet farmhand was gone. This was a soldier preparing for combat. Mark's eyes stayed on the men in suits. "Those are government plates. FBI? CIA? Not exactly," Cart muttered, scanning the tree line and open fields, calculating his next move. "Mr. Larson, I'm sorry. This is my problem, not yours." Mark shook his head. "It's on my farm, so it's my problem too." "What's going on, Cart?" For a moment, it seemed Cart wouldn't answer. Then he exhaled sharply. "Meridian Security. Private military contractor." Mark watched Cart's expression darken as he continued to survey the property. "They're looking for me because I wouldn't do what they asked," Cart admitted. "And because I kept proof of what they've been doing." His jaw tightened. "Assassinations. Illegal weapons sales. Things no American company should be involved in. Things I refuse to be part of." The pieces clicked into place for Mark. "So, you're not running from the law. You're running from them." Cart gave a humorless smirk. "The law's complicated in this situation. Meridian has government contracts. High-level connections." Finally, he met Mark's gaze. "I didn't mean to bring this to your doorstep. I'll handle it." "By yourself? Against all of them?" Mark gestured toward the farmhouse, where more men had appeared. "That's suicide." Cart's face gave nothing away. "I've dealt with worse." His tone was steady and sure, without any bravado. Mark made a decision. There's another way to the house, through the back fields. We can circle around and come in through the old storm cellar. Cart shook his head. This isn't your fight. It's my farm, Mark countered. They're trespassing on my land. His tone left no room for argument. Now, are we going to sit here talking, or are we going to do something about the men on my property? For the first time since they'd met, Cart smiled a genuine smile that transformed his face. Yes, sir. They abandoned the vehicles and moved through the cornfields, using the tall stalks as cover. Mark led them along the irrigation ditches, staying low and avoiding the sightlines of the men surrounding the house. They've got the place surrounded, Cart whispered as they crouched behind the tool shed. They're looking for something. Something like what? Mark asked. Cart's expression was grim as he pulled a small flash drive from his pocket. This. Everything Meridian doesn't want the world to know operations, clients, offshore accounts. Can't you just hand it over to the FBI or the press? Tried that. A haunted look flickered across Cart's face. The first journalist I contacted was found dead 2 days later. Robbery gone wrong, they called it. His voice went flat. Meridian has people everywhere. Mark processed this as Cart continued scanning their surroundings. I count 8 men, probably more inside the house. A chill ran through Mark. Armed men were searching his home, the place where he'd raised his children, where generations of Larsons had lived and died. What's the plan? Mark asked. I leave. Draw them away from your farm. It's me they want. Mark shook his head. They've already seen my truck. They know I'm connected to you. Running won't solve anything. Before Cart could respond, Mark's phone rang. Howard James. He silenced it. We need help, Mark said, dialing another number. Local help. David, it's Mark Larson. I've got a situation at my farm. Armed men in suits. Not local. Yeah, that's right. No, I'm not on the property watching from the tree line. Okay, thanks. He hung up. Sheriff's on his way with deputies. Cart looked skeptical. Your sheriff doesn't stand a chance against these guys. David served in special forces. He knows what he's doing. Mark's phone buzzed with a text. Stay put. 10 minutes. They waited, watching as the men methodically searched the property, checking out buildings and peering through windows. One of them found Cart's backpack in the cabin and brought it to a tall man in an expensive suit, an unusual choice given the rural setting. That's Vincent Cross, Cart whispered. Head of operations for Meridian. If he's here personally, they're desperate. Mark's phone buzzed again. David was in position with 4 deputies. County SWAT was on standby, and he'd put in calls to state police. Tell him we're coming in from the west side, Cart said, and that these men are armed and dangerous. Mark relayed the message, then followed Cart as they circled around to approach from the opposite direction of the sheriff's entry point. We're the distraction, Cart explained. We get their attention while David moves in from behind. Mark nodded, adrenaline surging through him. It had been decades since he'd faced anything more dangerous than a broken tractor, but some instincts never faded. Reaching the edge of the clearing, they spotted 3 men near the farmhouse porch, including Cross. Ready? Cart asked. As I'll ever be. Before they could move, the sound of approaching vehicles cut through the air fast and unexpected. 3 more black SUVs tore up the driveway, skidding to abrupt stops near the others. But these newcomers were different. The men who emerged weren't in suits. They wore tactical gear, moved with military precision, and carried themselves with the unmistakable bearing of combat veterans. What the hell? Mark whispered. Cart stared, his expression shifting from disbelief to understanding. Alpha Team, he breathed. My unit. Mark watched as the new arrivals took up defensive positions, their movements controlled and synchronized. These men had fought together before. The strong-built leader, wearing a vest with captain's bars, walked straight toward the gray-haired man in the expensive suit. Even from afar, the tension between them was clear. That's Vincent Cross, Cart whispered. Head of operations for Meridian. If he's here in person, they're desperate. Captain Richards and Cross stood face to face, neither backing down. When Richards finally spoke, his voice was clear and commanding. This operation is over, Cross. Stand down, your men. This is a Meridian operation, Cross shot back, just as forceful. You have no authority here. Richards held up a folder. I've got orders saying otherwise, he countered. Signed by the director himself. Cross stiffened, barely perceptibly. Impossible. The flash drive Carter has? We've got the backup. Every committee chairperson in Congress received the files this morning. Richards took another step forward. Your protection just evaporated. Mark glanced at Cart, who seemed just as stunned. Captain Richards was my commanding officer, Cart murmured. After I went AWOL with the evidence, I thought I was on my own. I had no idea they were. He shook his head. I should have trusted them. They're here now, Mark said. That's what matters. The standoff was reaching a breaking point. Cross's men had their hands near their weapons, while Richard's team remained poised for resistance. "We should get out there," Cart said suddenly, "before this turns into a firefight on your property." Before Mark could respond, sheriff's vehicles appeared from the main road, lights flashing. David Palmer stepped out, shotgun in hand, with deputies close behind. Alpha Team tipped off the sheriff, Cart realized. Smart. Local jurisdiction gives them legal cover. Sheriff David's voice rang out across the property. "This is private land. Unless someone shows me a warrant in the next 30 seconds, you're all trespassing." The arrival of local law enforcement created the perfect opening. Cart stepped out from their hiding place, hands raised. "I'm here, Cross," he called out. "This ends now." All eyes turned to him. Mark stood beside him, unwilling to let him face this alone. What happened next unfolded with military precision. Richard's team moved swiftly, positioning themselves between Cart and Cross's men, while Sheriff Palmer and his deputies formed an outer perimeter, cutting off any escape routes. Richards approached Cart and, to everyone's surprise, saluted him. "Sorry it took so long, Lieutenant," he said. "Had to make sure we had all our ducks in a row." "What changed?" Cart asked. "Your evidence reached the right people. The Joint Chiefs got involved." Richards offered a grim smile. "Turns out even Meridian's friends in high places have bosses." As federal agents began arriving clearly called in advance by Alpha Team, Cross was placed in handcuffs. His security team, outnumbered and outmaneuvered, surrendered without resistance. As the tension eased, curious townspeople started gathering, drawn by the convoy of law enforcement vehicles. Among them was Howard James, who approached Mark with wide eyes. "Mark, what in God's name is happening on your farm?" For once, Howard had no criticisms, only amazement at the major federal operation unfolding in their small town. By evening, the black SUVs had disappeared, replaced by news vans. The story was making national headlines: a private military contractor exposed for illegal operations, a whistleblower who risked everything to reveal the truth, and an elite military team that had backed him up when it mattered most. Mark sat on his porch with Cart Lieutenant Jacob Carter, as the news was calling him, watching the sunset over fields that had unexpectedly become the center of a national story. "What happens now?" Mark asked. "Congressional hearings. Trials. A lot of powerful people are going to face consequences." Cart looked tired but relieved. "For me? Months of testimony and debriefings. And after that?" Cart gazed out at the fields, glowing gold in the evening light. "I don't know. Never thought I'd make it this far, to be honest." Mark nodded toward the farm. "There's always work here if you want it, once all this dies down. Why would you still want me around? I brought all this to your doorstep." Mark looked out over the land his family had farmed for generations. "You did the right thing when it would have been easier not to." He smiled. "Besides, you fixed that irrigation pump in 20 minutes. That's rare these days." For the first time, Cart laughed, a sound Mark hadn't heard from him before. "I'll think about it." The next morning, most of the news vans had departed. Captain Richards and his team had relocated to a nearby military base as the investigation continued. Cart would be joining them later that day. As Mark walked him to his car, now packed with his few belongings, the rest of Alpha Team waited to escort him. "Thank you," Cart said, extending his hand, "for taking a chance on me when nobody else would." "Sometimes that's all it takes," Mark replied, shaking his hand. "One person willing to look past assumptions." As Cart drove away with his team, Mark turned to see a small crowd of townspeople gathered near his farm gate. At the front stood Howard James, looking uncharacteristically humbled. "Mark," Howard began awkwardly, "the town council met this morning. We'd like to offer some assistance with your irrigation system upgrade. Community fund." Mark raised an eyebrow. "That right? Seems the least we can do," Howard continued. "For the man who helped a national hero." "He wasn't a hero because of what happened yesterday," Mark said. "He was a hero when nobody was watching, when doing the right thing meant giving up everything." Howard nodded, understanding dawning. "The farm could use the help," Mark admitted. "But there's something else we need to discuss: Emma's college fund." 6 months later, Mark's farm had become something of a local landmark. Tourists occasionally drove by, hoping to glimpse the site of the Meridian standoff. The town had rallied behind him, using a community fund to modernize his irrigation system while preserving his commitment to sustainable farming. Emma had secured a scholarship, one created by the town council specifically for agricultural studies. She was thriving in college, calling home nearly every week with new ideas for the farm. And the small cabin at the edge of the property had a new occupant. Lieutenant Jacob Carter, now officially discharged from the Marines with honors, had returned to Oak Ridge after completing his testimony. The congressional hearings had exposed corruption that reached the highest levels of government and private industry. On a cool autumn evening, Mark and Cart sat on the porch, watching the harvest moon rise over fields that had yielded their best crop in years. "Never thought I'd end up a farmer," Cart said, sipping his coffee. Never thought I'd hire a national whistleblower, Mark replied with a smile. Life takes unexpected turns. That it does. Cart was silent for a moment, then said, You know, when I went on the run with that flash drive, I thought I was alone. Thought everyone I'd served with had either turned or wouldn't risk their careers to stand with me. And you were wrong, Mark said. Completely. Captain Richards had been building a case for months, gathering his own evidence. He just needed mine to complete the picture. Cart shook his head. All that time running, thinking I had no one, and I had allies I never even knew about. Mark nodded. That's usually how it works. The people who stand with you in the hard times aren't always the ones you expect. From the road came the sound of approaching vehicles. Emma was home for the weekend, bringing some of her college friends to help with the Harvest Festival preparations. The town had decided to hold it at the Larson farm this year, the first time in decades it hadn't been on the town square. You gave me a chance when you had every reason not to, Cart said quietly. Changed everything. No, Mark corrected him. You changed everything when you chose to do what was right, no matter the cost, Mark said, gazing out at the farmland stretching before them, now thriving. I just gave you a place to stand. As Emma's car pulled up, followed by several others filled with young people eager to help with the festival, Mark and Cart rose to greet them. The farmyard would soon be filled with laughter and energy, a stark contrast to the armed standoff that had taken place there months before. You know what the real irony is? Mark said as they walked toward the cars. This farm was on the brink. One more bad season, and I might have lost it all. Now, he gestured to the flourishing fields, the repaired buildings, the new irrigation system. Now, it's going to be here for another generation. Strange how things work out, Cart agreed. Not strange, Mark said. Just a reminder that doing the right thing matters even when it feels like the world is against you. Even when you can't see how it's going to end. As the young people climbed out of their cars, bringing with them the energy and optimism of a new generation, Mark reflected on the lesson that had played out on his farm. Sometimes, the most important choice was the simplest one: to give someone a chance when others wouldn't, to stand by your principles when it would be easier to compromise, to believe that doing the right thing mattered, even when the outcome was uncertain. And sometimes, making that choice meant finding your land surrounded by armed men in black SUVs. But what came after could change everything, not just for you, but for an entire community. And that was a harvest worth more than any crop could ever be. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.